who is Chelsea Manning? And so it just kind of made sense that that became the piece to, again, create that space for people to enter into the dialogue about who is Chelsea Manning. And just to kind of, I have this, it's this idea of like, once you know, you can't unknow.
Jeff Durkin with We Are Change Connecticut. We're out here in New York City, and we just caught up with the artist Kyle Goen, who's recently at the festival in Brooklyn highlighting his piece about Chelsea Manning. Kyle, thanks for coming out, and maybe tell us, for people who don't know about that project and kind of the background in that.
Cool. Yeah, so I over the weekend, Dumbo Arts Festival was happening out in Brooklyn, and I had a piece called Who's Chelsea Manning, and basically it was a piece that hung across Water Street. It spanned basically the distance of the street, hanging off of one side of a building and attached to scaffolding that was attached to the other building on the other side of the street. And the piece consisted of 1,600 flags made out of paper that were stranded together and basically created a portrait of Chelsea. Yeah.
So maybe people, your background maybe, and how you became an artist, and then how you kind of merged, going with more political activism, raising awareness about it through art, through expressing that.
I didn't hear that last part.
Oh, no, it's just a way of, using your artistic abilities, expressing it through political messages, stuff like that.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think that, I got into art probably through punk rock music when I was a kid. I grew up, I'm a kind of an older guy. I grew up in the 80s, California, listening to hardcore music, punk rock, and that kind of shaped my politics. Some of my things happening in my personal life too, but I think the majority of like understanding the world, pushing back against racism, sexism, and things like that, homophobia. I think that was a part, getting that through punk rock music. And then just kind of, as I grew older, getting into high school and about ready to leave high school, I had a teacher that was like, you're gonna go to art school. And I was like, okay, never thought I was going to college. And then I ended up in art school in New York City. And, the first piece I ever did, political piece I did, was about, it was about the Rodney King verdict. And it was my senior thesis show, and I put an installation together about the verdict. And since then I've really tried to use my own work as a voice for myself, and then also to create a space that opens, allows other people to enter into the conversation. And so I also use my art. I do a lot of art with activist groups, helping them raise money, things like that. So I'll teach people how to silk screen, how to make their own T-shirts, so that then they can fundraise their organizations or programs, things like that. So, always trying to keep that conversation evolving, and just really trying to use my art as my own voice, but then allowing other people into the conversation, I think as many voices as possible,
Now going back to your recent piece, Chelsea Manning, who is Chelsea Manning, what got you to think of the idea, even the amount of 1,600, the actual number of pieces to put the piece together? Just maybe a background for people about how that came about and, your idea.
Really the idea for the piece, I had done some similar pieces to it. First, I was doing these ceiling pieces for various installations. I had a project that was called Elect a Madman, You Get Madness. And I started it around the first inauguration of Bush in 2001. And it was a project that I did for 8 years. And in the course of that project, building that project, I was invited to go to Iceland, and I had to create this room. And I didn't know what the size or what the room looked like, so I created these flags that had the image of Elect a Madman on it, and I turned that into a ceiling piece. And then I did another ceiling piece around the Obama election. The first time this altar, it was called the Altar of Hope and Fear, and it was about whether we were headed towards empire or whether we were going to continue in the direction of empire, or whether we were really moving to some kind of change. And what was that change, just not having George Bush as our president, or were we really as a country looking to change our direction? And so I had used those same sort of flags as that piece. So when I was thinking about doing this outdoor piece, it just kind of coincided with what was happening to Chelsea. She had already been incarcerated for 3 years, and the people were starting to talk about, is the trial going to happen? Is there going to be a trial? Then the trial started. People really started like, oh, the trial is going to happen by the end of summer. By the beginning of summer, it's going to happen. So it was just, it all kind of, as I'm talking about that news thing with people on my day-to-day, everyone kept asking me, who is that? Who is that? Who is Chelsea Manning? And so it just kind of made sense that became the piece to, again, create that space for people to enter into the dialogue about who is Chelsea Manning. And just to kind of, I have this idea of like, once you know, you can't unknow. And so it's like, okay, you've gone this far not knowing who Chelsea Manning is, but now there's this art piece that you're interacting with. And now who's Chelsea Manning? And so it's like, I get a lot of people when I show work, Google titles that I give my pieces, and then they come back to me and they're like, wow, I didn't know who this person was, and now I'm like, why don't I know who that person is? And so then they're like writing down more titles and doing more Google searches, and it just kind of opens up this world. So as an artist, I'm like just kind of throwing a pebble into the water and just never know how that resonates. And so then building the piece, when I initially submitted the proposal to the festival, there was no scaffolding on the street. And then in the process of getting ready to put the piece together, the scaffolding went up and I had to shrink the piece down, I think by like 24%. And so shrinking the piece down, the number of flags ended up being 1,600 flags, which I thought was poetic because I think that kind of allowed me to turn the piece back to the address of the White House, 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, and just make that connection to these people in government and power and to what was happening to Chelsea. And what she was exposing was really about these same people that were now prosecuting her. So it did allow the piece to kind of early on take on this kind of poetry that art has this power to do, that then really kind of can draw people in. And the festival was another. Once I realized I wanted to submit a piece to the festival, it really made sense to do a piece like this with Chelsea as the center of the piece, because the festival is this opportunity where they get about 200,000 visitors to the festival, and they're people of all walks of life. People that know nothing about art and people that are very art savvy, and so you really open up this space to get 200,000 new people asking who Chelsea Manning is. And it was a very humbling experience over the weekend. The amount of times people said her name, it was very affirming. How many people said her name, how many people tweeted or posted images with a hashtag with her name in it. And it was just a really humbling experience for me as an artist to have kind of been able to create that space to just bring in all these different people. So
wrap it up here, where can people find your work? Any websites you want to plug for people to either support you or help you continue it?
Yeah, cool. So you can find me. My email is kylegoen.net, and then you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Kyle Did This.
Aspect I am of course disappointed with. We were hoping for a much better sentence, but the way forward now is doing everything we can to reduce that, to get a sentence that is more in line with what justice would require.
Please publicize this. I mean, the mainstream establishment press only shows up on the big days. They show up on the verdict, on the sentence day, on the first day of the trial, but they're not there for the year and a half, the 2 years of the hearings that actually make a difference, that